Welcome to the Inside Climbing Podcast. My name is Rory, and I am joined this week by Natalie Berry and Tyler Norton to debrief the first Pro Climbing League event. Natalie is a journalist, a former GB athlete, and former editor of UK Climbing. Tyler ran the Plastic Weekly podcast, one of the very few competition climbing focused podcasts for many years, alongside John Burgman. We talk a lot about the route setting and the format and the trade-offs which come with having such a format and the pressure it puts on the route setters. We compare the event to IFSC World Climbing competitions, and we also talk about the differences between the in-person experience which I had compared to the experience Natalie and Tyler had watching the live stream. Let's jump right in. So we're here to just chat about PCL, which happened on Saturday. So I haven't actually watched the live stream yet. I'm going to watch it at some point, and I am going to do some stats on it because I do want to see how little climbing there was in a 4-hour event, because it didn't feel, compared to World Cups, in which the World Cups kind of cram as much climbing as possible at all times. Even if the climber's doing nothing, there's still a climber on the mat. They try and maximize that, whilst this clearly did other things. So yeah, I'm really curious to hear about from you guys what you thought of the show and of the live stream. And you can ask me about the event in person itself, and we can just chat about that. But I thought it'd be a good place to start, just to, if someone wants to talk about how they felt about the event.
Yeah, I thought the speed route setting was, I didn't expect that. It was an interesting element, but maybe a band or something next time would be cool, live music, just making a spectacle of route setting.
Yeah, I do think it would be cool to have pseudo little Super Bowl type things where you have a band per event, and the band comes out and plays a 12-minute set whilst the route setters are setting, and you can listen to the band and enjoy it whilst the route setters go and do their thing, which hopefully would mean they wouldn't be quite so stressed about how quickly they do it.
Yeah, maybe get Beyonce lined up or someone.
I'm not sure they can afford Beyonce yet.
Bad Bunny, I don't know. But yeah, I was slightly concerned about the safety aspect of speed route setting, like volumes flying off the wall or screws sticking out. But they did a good job.
Yeah, or even just when you're screwing in screws into holds, are you going to crack the hold because you went too fast with the drill?
Cross thread.
Because I know. Exactly, because some of the new holds, which I know Absolute, which is one of the hold brands they used, that their way of setting in screws and T-nuts into holds is a bit more secure and is a bit more safe. So I do wonder whether that helps with that, but I'm not sure all manufacturers do that. So I'm kind of curious, what holds get damaged in that process? I saw some of the testing, but unsurprisingly, the times in which I went to try and talk to athletes were when they were doing the route setting. So I didn't actually get to see any of the F1 style pit stop resetting.
Yeah, I was worried, what the jeopardy of falling off a ladder or something. You wouldn't want to fall off a ladder in front of. I know I would do that. It's
really far on those ladders, especially when you're on mats. They feel quite bouncy. And It does not feel that safe. I'm always impressed how route setters just kind of go up these things like it's nothing, whilst both hands are full with holds.
Was it Jackie Höfland team? It was a US-led team, wasn't it?
So I think Ian and Jackie from Kilter were there. So I think they were interviewed on the live stream. We didn't actually see any of that, I think, in person. Or they showed it during the route setting resets, and I was elsewhere trying to talk to people. But it sounded because Kilter's massively involved in this, because all the walls are big Kilter adjustable walls, in that sort of Lemur style of walls. And then, a lot of the holes were Kilter, and I think they are I think Jackie was director of route setting or something, I think was how she was introduced for it. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to work out, the route setting is something I'm into minds over, because it really feels like it's a really hard job, especially for this. But it's also a job which is really thankless, because I don't think anyone cares about the routes.
Yeah. I think I said before, I don't know I didn't really know how the route setters were going to approach it, because too easy, it's a no-show, too hard, it's a no-show. You got people sat on the mats. But yeah, I think there were good and bad examples. But so much of it just comes down to luck as well. And yeah, but some highlights.
I can remember the women's final kind of because Janja slipped, and I remember it because Janja slipped. I remember the men's because Max broke the beta entirely. It was kind of a cool beta, but maybe it was on the slightly too hard end of the spectrum. But Max breaking the beta and doing the jamming was really, really cool. The foot jam apparently was incredibly bomber, and he could have probably just gotten no hands from the sounds of things off the foot jam. It was so good, and he's good at jamming. And then I remember Toby and Mejdi's race. That was fun. Maybe Colin and Tomoa, and then Mejdi and Max in the men's semi-final boulder. But that's all the ones I can really remember. Which was 4 boulders. I can remember 4 out of the 12 boulders.
Yeah, I felt like the quarterfinal ones were quite forgettable in some ways. They felt more like lead head wall routes, just kind of tick-tacky moves trying to make someone slip, or there weren't really any memorable. It didn't feel like modern bouldering, which was interesting, but it wasn't super spectacular. It did start to feel a bit more speed bouldery, I think, initially. But it definitely got better. The finals, semi-final and final boulders were definitely the most creative, and in terms of splitting the field as well, the men's boulder was the best one for sure, and the most memorable.
There's part of me which sort of wonders, if we had a preset list of boulders, which they use for every comp, how much will I care about that? And I'm not sure I really do. It felt like the variety we expect from route setting, in which the World Cup really explores, just wasn't there at the PCL, and I don't know whether it can be, especially on walls which were quite short. I felt like some of the times the climbers were going to fall on each other. I felt like on the first boulder, I felt like Tomoa wasn't jumping to the last hole because he was afraid he'd fall on Darius. You could sort of see him being tentative. On a move, you'd expect Tomoa to nail every single time, because Darius was at this, either fell off and was in the fall zone, or was on the start of the boulder.
Yeah, I think route setting wise, that's certainly true when it comes to okay, the wall is just a flat surface, and it's surprisingly few volumes in some of those cases. But that's I don't think that's necessarily the limit. But you notice when you're doing an IFSC comp, of course, you have the weakest climbers coming out first, and you kind of build a relationship with a boulder where you see probably a lot of attempts on a climb, and you see the moves being tried different ways, and then you get the capstone of the strongest people doing it correctly, and then doing it beyond correctly, breaking the beta afterwards. Whereas in this case, if Janja comes in and breaks the beta in 20 seconds, we don't get to see the other climbers develop their way through the climb and learn how the moves go. So yeah, the boulders, I think, felt shallow, if only because the format doesn't allow you to see somebody work them. So that's one struggle. Also, in some cases, probably too easy for this format. Charlie and Danon were adamant that they did not want a speed bouldering competition. This was 75% a speed bouldering competition, and that's because the boulders were too easy. But you picked a format that depends on the quality of the boulders, and there's no such thing as a guaranteed difficulty on a climb. No route setters are perfect. Every comp will have easy stuff and hard stuff. And if you pick a competition that, emphasizes the randomness of this, then you're going to have comps like the one that we had this weekend.
Especially in the earlier rounds, I wasn't focusing on the individual moves. I was just trying to see who'd got higher, and I was just completely blanking on any detail on the problems. And
sure,
I think it was disappointing to see, as soon as someone was obviously going to top and win the round, the athletes were just giving up. I remember seeing, I think it was Erin in once or twice, I'm so used to seeing Erin fighting to the end and other athletes fighting to the end, and to not have that fight and just see them give up, oh well, that was, kind of disappointing. But again, just all hinges on the route setting.
Even when you have boulders which are hard, then it still is a race. It's just a race to a lower point on the route, unfortunately, because of the way people are split by time. So even in the finals, had Max not broken the beta for the men's final, then that would have been a race to that second hold, and like whoever won that race wins. Especially with how they start facing out and then turning around and then running to the start holds. You do like, I'm gonna have a look at this, but I do wonder whether in some of the race more racy ones where they are racing, like does that how much of that is an impact? Are we judging people's ability to do climbs quickly based on their ability to run to the start hold from their starting position, which feels even worse, really. Instead of like having, because in speed climbing, you set the start and you're in that set point, you go from there.
Yeah, I thought they'd have like marked points on the mats. It wasn't clear. It just seemed like the athletes were kind of trying to gauge if they were in line with the other person then going, but it wasn't clear as a spectator.
Do you guys think that decided any of the races though? Like, does anybody actually think that was the okay?
Like Toby Mejdi, well, the fact is that Toby was actually ahead for like the first half, and then Mejdi catches him up on like the top half of it, so it kind of is okay for that. But I was wondering, like, because that was so close, like, could it have been down to the speed they went to the start holds? You could see everyone, especially on the later round when they didn't know how hard or not the route was going to be. They raced to the start and they raced as far as they could. And if it was hard, then they took their time a bit more, like on the men's semi-final ones.
Yeah, just keeping in the theme of like athlete behavior, I'm curious what you guys thought about the idea of like interaction between the athletes, because that was another talking point that seemed like something that the organizers wanted to allow for, was how do climbers behave when they can see each other climbing, when they can see that somebody's ahead of the other. Did that play out the way you expected to?
Yeah, I don't know. I saw there were a few like winking faces and smiles, but yeah, I don't really remember any moments where they were sort of actively playing off each other. It just kind of, I mean, I know in a World Cup they have to ignore each other and there's no interaction at all. I mean, I guess it was cool, but it wasn't.
They might just not have the habit of, thinking that this is allowed, right? I thought it was curious that they still read beta together in some cases. I didn't think that was gonna happen, but I also didn't really expect an observation period for this format. I'm not sure that was entirely necessary, but it doesn't really bother me. But yeah, aside from the moments where the one person standing on the mat just watching the other person top it, sadly, that was kind of the only recurring interaction that we got to see. I don't know, like Colin kind of getting psyched for a second, or sorry, no, it was Mejdi, I guess. No, it was Colin, yeah. But yeah, there wasn't any like shit talking each other. You didn't see a lot of like laughing about like hard moves or anything like that. There wasn't too much addressing each other once the climbing actually started. So that was like, that was a bit of a letdown. It's not nearly like one of my major complaints or anything, because I think there's also room for the athletes to kind of get to know how this works and then be different next time once they get comfortable with it. Same thing with like racing up to the wall. I think once they've done this a few times, the athletes are going to understand like how important it is to get on the wall as fast as you possibly can and treat resting differently based on different routes. So we'll see what happens next time. Yeah,
as the difficulty kind of increases, I think you'll see a first attempt, which is a rush, and then people will slow down and they go, actually, I'm not racing to, this is a hard route. That means I'm racing to get to a hold further than I'm not to get to a hold faster, and I need to rest. But I think the routes just weren't hard enough. And that is the other kind of challenge you have in bouldering, is that often if you have a crux, which is likely in bouldering because that's half the point of bouldering, then it's a race to that crux. And you have the challenge that can someone get through that crux then becomes the question. Like you had with Max and Mejdi, which is kind of how it felt in that top section, and Colin and Tamara as well in that top section, that men's boulder, which is why that one really worked really well.
Yeah, I felt like the boulders needed at least two cruxes, like a lower crux, so that someone might slip off that. The other person might keep going, but then they might fall off a higher crux, and the other person gets a chance to go back on, and they're not giving up. It's not game over in one attempt. I also felt that Max actually went against the whole rushing and like speed element because he was so relaxed, and I think it must have worked well for him. I'm sure it was just a combination of all the different factors, but I remember when he first went out, he was just like blowing chalk off his hands, stepped up to the wall, had a go, fell off, low down, and then went and got a brush, and I was screaming at him. I was like, what are you doing? It's a race. Why are you brushing holds? I just didn't expect them to be brushing and stuff, but he just did it. He brushed the hold, and then he won the round and was through. So it worked for him, that sort of calm approach.
I think it varied. I think some of the athletes definitely talked about how they would see them out the corner. Like Max talked about this, seeing them out the corner of their eye and like checking where they were whilst on the climb. Whilst I think some just focused on themselves. Like Erin talked about that she was able to not focus on the other athlete and just focus on herself. While I feel like most of the athletes really were aware of the other one, and some of them were, I don't think they necessarily were trying to psych each other out, so to say. I think some athletes tried to go faster and put the other athlete under pressure, but I didn't, you could see that in Camilla and Erin. Like Camilla was ahead of Erin on the second boulder, and Erin was moving slower, and it took a little bit of time until, and Erin kind of made it through. And then managed to then just do the top quite quickly after that. But Erin was just a bit slower, but more methodical. And Yanya kind of was as well against Lucia. Lucia really tried to push. And I think that's one of the things which really shows you that this is a racing format, because athletes push with the time and with the speed. And if this was not a racing format, people wouldn't be pushing.
Frankly, think that if you are going to go with individual boulders and you're going to go head to head, that is a pill you've chosen to swallow, and you have to be ready for this situation. Sometimes you will have boulders where it feels too fast and it feels like the action is over with in the snap of the fingers, and then other times you're going to have boulders where the audience complains that nobody got to the top and the athletes couldn't break the crux. Hopefully you achieve a happy medium, at least half the time. But that's there's really, in my opinion, nothing you can do about this. I would say if this is the format you choose, you swallow that this is the risk you're going to take, and you just try to make everything else good, right? I think that was one weakness that I felt from the comp that I think could be easily improved upon. Or I shouldn't say easily, I wouldn't know how to improve upon it, but I'm sure somebody in the Red Bull media, behemoth can figure it out. I felt like when somebody won their race and it was now, okay, congratulations, you've moved on to the next step, they didn't spend a lot of time addressing that moment. And of course, there wasn't much build up to that because the boulders were so short and fast, you couldn't really build up to that moment of release. But we didn't get to see brackets really partway through the competition. And so it wasn't very easy to track, what had happened so far, or we couldn't say, okay, Tomoa won this duel. Let's find out who he's about to climb against. If he ends up climbing against Mejdi, well, they have, similar styles, and Mejdi is kind of considered the person that's taking over the torch of dynamic bouldering from Tomoa. But if he ends up climbing against, whoever else, they're antithetical styles. We didn't get too much time to actually look at what had happened so far and what could happen next. And I thought that was a big weakness in both the visuals that were presented, which were completely lacking in that regard, but then also in the commentary. And I just think that's because the commentators didn't have the tools to do it in this instance. So that's one thing I would try and fix for the next competition for sure.
It also wasn't very clear to me, at least watching at home, whether the athletes were aware of who was winning throughout the climb. If nobody had topped, it wouldn't be very easy as an athlete to know what the other person has reached exactly. And I didn't know if they had some kind of indication on those side panels at either end of the mats, or if they just sort of guessed that roughly from where they fell off. Or I thought maybe some kind of light system at the top of the wall might help sort of tell them that, where you got to, that's the high point. I just didn't really know what they were thinking and whether they knew exactly what they needed to do.
What was visible in the venue? Because for us, we had an overlay that would say this climber made it to the 5th of 7 holds, and this climber had made it to the 6th of 7 holds, but it didn't say who had gotten there first, I don't think. Was that?
It said leader.
Oh, did it? Oh, okay.
It said leader above, but it wasn't very notable. I did miss it at first, but.
I didn't notice that. Were those progress indicators visible to the crowd, Rory?
So the scoring in the stadium was quite a bit, was in front of the wall. So you had the wall, and then it was quite in front. This is the thing which I one of the things I love the most is I had live scoring above the wall. Come on, world climbing, this is what we need. Not on the side with no scrolling pattern. What we need to know is what's going on now. But no, I don't think they did know what the actual scores were at the time. They had big clocks in the corners, and I don't know. But the routes were most of them were quite short, like 8. I think one was maybe 11 moves long, but like 8-7 moves. And I think they just kind of knew roughly where they had gotten to, and that was how they judged.
It wasn't clear to us at home who had won the Mejdi-Toby race, even by the time the next pair had come out. Was it clear to you guys? Because that was like the first moment where we were like, oh, they've actually missed some things in terms of how the scoring is communicated.
So they did a really good job actually in the stadium, because they showed the slow-mo and they showed it twice, and you could easily see, and everybody watched it, and it was kind of like a bated breath moment. It was really cool. It was easy to see in the slow-mo.
You guys thought it was easy to see? We got the slow-mo too, and we weren't like, nobody in the Discord was like willing to commit to who the actual winner was, I don't think.
Yeah, on the slow-mos we saw it twice, it was really obvious like who had won. And it was like the athletes obviously knew, and we obviously knew in the stadium that Mejdi beat Toby.
Did the MC suggest that? Because like Shauna and the other gentleman commentating, I don't think they were willing to give an answer.
So Louis who was the MC, Louis Parkinson was the MC. He did announce it when it was confirmed by the scoring in the venue. And we'll keep coming back to this. Like, it is in many ways speed bouldering, but that's not a bad thing. It can be really fun, and you can have a really cool format with that. But you're testing people's ability to execute and race. That's
exactly what Oriane just wrote in an Instagram post, talking about it really forced us to execute well, keep calm under pressure, climb efficiently, and she said it was perfect practice ahead of the World Cup season, so she enjoyed it.
Yes, this is what Erin and actually every athlete said, is that this is a format which values execution above all else, which for a format which, at least initially, Charlie and Dylan both claimed would have hard boulders. And when you think of hard boulders, you don't think of execution. But actually, it is execution. And it's not just execution in terms of using your energy, but it's in terms of using your energy earlier and to get that attack and being able to not make mistakes early on. Which would be quite cool to see as if more of these PCL events happen, which I hope they do, that you'll see athletes who compete in them may get better at executing. And how does that then affect World Cups, where executing boulders is not the biggest thing, but it matters a lot. Like, this is a format, ironically, which values the flash above all else, and a quick flash above all else, which is something people have been calling for, is they want the flash to matter more in World Cups, and it does. And this is a format which does that. And
can I pose a question to everybody? Like, my question was so actually, let me preface this first, because I did want to say this. Like, now that Charlie and Danon have switched over from the world of commentary and industry people, and now they're on the organizer side, now we can just light them up the same way I would with the IFSC. So I'm absolutely ready to take them to task for every decision and every tiny mistake they make. But the fun thing here is, if they are going to hold more events, which I've been adamant that they will, I think the one thing to recognize first is the biggest achievement they've had was getting the sponsors and building the infrastructure and the commitments from the money, right? So huge congratulations, and of course, congratulations for pulling off the event itself. But I think the thing that I would say right now, and I hope they're sympathetic to this, which I think they suggested they were, was that there is no need to hold on to this format. If they think there are things about the format that don't work, I'm guessing the investment and the commitments from all of their partners is not contingent on the format itself. And if they want to make changes, they should. Do them now while you still have the backing of all these companies. Change something up for next time. And I think the thing I'd really like to see them reconsider, first of all, is addressing the downtime, but also probably giving us more time to savor the duel between the finalists than in the qualification. I honestly think switching from BO3 qualifiers and BO1 finals, reverse that to BO1 qualifiers, BO3 finals. Like if we're doing so few boulders in the first place, there are going to be upsets all the time. You get to decide where you want them. But the fact that we spend an hour on qualifiers per gender, and then we got, literally 30 seconds of finals per gender, really didn't feel like a satisfying experience. My engagement in this event went down over time, and I waited 3.5 hours to watch some of the best climbers in the world spend a piddly amount of time on the finals. And I think even though we had the two extremes, the men going right down to the end of the clock and the women pretty much flashing it, it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and a 2-minute final doesn't do it for me if it's Oriane versus Janja or whatever the biggest men's names are. So I think it's worth reconsidering things in that ballpark, whether it's that suggestion or not. I just say don't oversubscribe to this format if you can see obvious weaknesses so far. And I think the duration of the event and lack of climbing is like the obvious weakness for spectators right now. And I'm sure you guys agree, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think I did some quick maths when I was struggling to fall asleep after. Maybe it was the
It was that exciting?
I think
Wow.
it must have been about... Well, Louise did the scientific thing, which said it was really exciting. But the heart rate monitoring stuff. But I think I worked it out, it would be about 50 minutes climbing, but not even, because a lot of people topped within 20 seconds or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, around 50 minutes of climbing out of the whole 3.5 to 4 hours. So that's not, great value for money in terms of climbing. But yeah, I think I agree that having multiple rounds for the finals would be more exciting and worthwhile than the qualifiers. It was a shame that we missed out on, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet, the third boulder. We never got to see that yellow slab boulder. Rest in peace. I thought that was not ideal that it came down to 2 boulders. I think it should be best of 3, something like that.
Rory, what did you guys think? Like how did the vibe in the building change over time?
It did feel like it dragged, and but I did the qualifiers, I think, because it was new and it was like exciting and different. I think that 2 hours felt a bit faster for some of us, and especially as I was going backstage to try and interview people and wait there instead of just watching the resetting. We didn't get a lot of the pre-recorded videos apart from the athlete introduction ones in the venue, I think, and so which it sounds like were really the TV broadcast really benefited from a lot of that stuff. I kind of feel like the IFSC World Climbing. I'm gonna make that mistake so many times this year. They're still called World Cups. World Climbing. Sorry. You
follow ifsc.tv on twitter.com. Come on, man.
But like the World Climbing have squeezed every single drop of non-climbing out of a World Cup final broadcast. They have even gotten to the point where they've got 2 climbers climbing at the same time on different boulders in order to speed it all up. And you have no space for storytelling within that. Whilst here, I feel like they did the opposite. They were like, we're going to have the least amount of climbing, most amount of storytelling. And he's like 2 extremes, and I kind of want something in the middle. I want a bit more storytelling in World Cups. I want them to spend an extra half hour, like get to see the athletes, get to see the interviews, get to know how things are going, tell the story. And I think here we want to see a bit more climbing and a bit less introduction of things. It did feel like this went the opposite route. The IFSC was like, let's take climbing and then let's try and maximize that amount of climbing and make it just have lots of climbing and not worry about everything else. And here it's like, we're going to take a standard sports broadcast and we're going to fit climbing inside it. And we're going to have all the standard sports broadcast things of interviewing and explaining stuff and having people talking behind the scenes and having mid breaks and all that stuff. And then you have climbing is like ancillary to that and is kind of just a vehicle for the athletes and for the story, more so than being central stage. Whilst in World Cups, the climbing is central stage. The boulders in a Boulder World Cup are central stage, which is quite like they feel like 2 extremes, and I kind of want something in the middle.
Yeah, I think watching at home, the athlete introduction videos just got quite repetitive, especially because most of them just focused on the new format and like, what do you think of this, or not even what do you think of this, like what do you think it will be like, because they hadn't obviously competed at that point, they were pre-recorded. I just felt there was more room for narrative because there was a lot of satellite events and like there was a seeding round, but we never really got to hear the story of how, well, first of all, the wild card round, like how Max and Jenny actually got to be there. That's quite a cool story. And then the seeding round, apparently the boulders were really exciting. We didn't see that much of that. Yeah, just more of a narrative around the community, how the community is built into these events and meeting the athletes. I think that would have been quite interesting, or more interesting than the sort of repetitive athlete intros.
I think they should have a panel of 3 people in the rest period talking about climbers. Maybe you've got somebody that's a long-time climbing journalist, maybe somebody that crunches the numbers, maybe a non-British person as well.
A non-British person?
I don't know. If anybody can think of a
Commentating on
trio.
climbing? What do you mean,
Yeah,
Tyler?
I'm just saying a little bit of diversity. You know, I could suggest some people, but you know, whatever. I think they should use that in the breaks. I think you're entirely right about the allotment of time, and I think that especially with like, this is the one time, like the 1 out of 10 time where the person from the wild card actually, you know, wins the thing. It would have been great to have that storytelling for sure. But even if it is just, you know, 1 or 2 people that can on the fly talk about the development of the story rather than having to have like video crews at the wild card and all that stuff, because that is expensive and it has a lot of time outside the actual like shooting hours. Maybe you just need a second pair of people that can just talk about any top climbers. That's a genuine suggestion, so that you can fill that time, give Shauna and I still forget his name, give them a break. Bryn, gotcha. Anything to fill that time, because whether it was the resetting times or whether it was the mandatory break time to give the athletes enough rest before they come out for the next climb, the little athlete videos weren't enough to fill those time slots. And I think, you know, Shauna and Bryn, the idea of filling 3.5, 4 hours just between the two of you, especially when there's so little to talk about actually happening at the event, that's like got to be one of the hardest jobs in commentary. So I think that load needs to be lightened a little bit. Can I throw a quick idea out? Like, what if the qualifying happened on a previous day and was pre-recorded? And then you just show everyone the pre-recorded qualifiers, no breaks in between the climbs, and then we go straight to a live semifinal. Anyway, I'm like, we're not in charge of this, but I think it was simply too long an event. They got to figure out how to tighten it up, in my opinion. That's my biggest feedback.
So I was at the seeding round, which was one of the sickest competitions I've ever seen, especially for like, because it's held in the font Wandsworth, which has a Titan wall, which is where all the boulders were set, and all of us were just standing at the edge of the mat watching the best climbers in the world 3 meters away from us, just climbing some really sick boulders. They were really good.
Can you tell us some of the names that were there that didn't qualify through?
Oh no, the seeding round, everyone qualified through. It's just seeding for the round. I
Oh, sorry. I thought we were talking about wild card. You're right.
I think for the wild card, you had a lot of the best of Britain, other British athletes who are competing in a lot of those. And so it's really, in many ways, unsurprising that Jenny won the wild card. And it was really good of Matt. It was really cool to see Matt, because I think like Zoe Petermans was there. Louise made the final. Flockhart made the final. I can't remember who else was there on the men's side. I imagine Diane was there, who won British Bouldering Championship. I don't know if Jack McDougall was there, but like the best of kind of British, mainly, I think, turned up to the wildcard events, which they ran, rather than it be like have that many international people turn up. But the seeding round, the purpose of that seeding round was seeding the athletes was there, but that was not the main point of it. It was clearly a round designed in which you get to the VIPs, the investors, the important people, to be able to witness awesome climbing from 3 meters away and really feel the vibe and the psych and really go, this is a really cool thing I've invested in. I'm really this is really, really cool. I get to watch Yanya from 3 meters away climb some epic boulders. I get to see, so like what the men's boulder for was like this lache under the roof inside the Titan wall. You have the roof and they would lache on and they jump up, and it was absolutely awesome. It was a really sick boulder. And then I think that whole point of that round was not to really show the climbing. It was supposed to be special behind the scenes and really be intimate and not be something which was televisable. It's literally in a gym. You have 100 people watching. It's not there to be televised. As much as people want to see it, you'd have to do it completely differently if you were to do it.
One of the highlights was, first of all, having a seeding round, but also the seeding round was great because it like accurately called all of the quarterfinal rounds, right? Like I think they nailed the seeding, so great job there. I think that right off the bat, we could see that it clearly put the right pairs together to make sure that if there were upsets, they happened like later in the comp, which they were rewarded for. So glad that happened at all and they didn't go off rank or whatever. Can I ask what the experience was like? I know you were working, you said, but if I had gone to this event, can you tell me like what the energy was in the crowd, as they're waiting to get in there? What were the amenities like in the room? Like I saw they didn't splurge on chairs, it looks like. But I think there was a bar at the back. Like what was the experience like? So if people are thinking about going to the next one, what do you think they could expect going to this?
It felt like you were going to a concert, which is really cool. And I think that's the vibe they're going for. It was all standing, but like so many concerts you go to, like I've been to so many concerts, which is just standing. You're in a small venue, like we have like these little O2 academies where the ceiling is only like 2 feet above your head, and it's just for where the audience is, and it's hot and it's sweaty, and the music just reverberates around the room. Everything does, and you get that kind of that effect which you can never get unless you're in like a small concert space. And so it was really, a lot of the athletes described it as electric, and I think that's a good description of that feeling. And the crowd was a really sight crowd, and the cheer for like when Yanya was announced was just insane. And then the cheering for Max and the cheering for Erin was also just crazy. It was just awesome, and it was really cool. Being there, and Louis did an awesome job as MC, getting everyone really psyched about it and really getting the audience to kind of cheer when it was needed. And the athletes would also like Max did this in the finals, but the athletes would go and ask the audience for support sometimes, and you'd had that interaction. And so that was just that. So that's like while the event's going on. They had a bar at the back, and then they only had 2 food trucks out front which was not enough because they opened before 6, before people got in, and all the staff and everyone who was working there went to get their food from them and had taken most of the food. Like the Mexican had no rice or plantain chip crisps by the time I went to get food after that 6. And so there was not enough food at the place. It was really, really cool. Having the open warm-up was really cool. Isolation was still closed, so like the isolation behind the wall, that was closed off, and they had a Red Bull athlete area which they could also go to, which was closed off, so they didn't but the warm-up area with a kilter board and a spray wall, those were both open, and people could go and watch the athletes. I think some of them described it as a zoo. Erin described it as it felt like being in the zoo, but not a bad thing. I think some of them were happy with being watched and being kind of appreciated for what they do, and because not many people get to see how World Cup level climbers and the best of them warm up and just try hard boulders on spray wall and kilter board. And like some of the athletes, there was no obligation on the athletes to go talk to any of the people in the crowd, and some of them I'm sure did, and that is quite cool.
Mm-hmm. I saw an Instagram comment from someone who's said their kid said it was the best day of their life. I assume because whether they'd met the athletes, I don't know, but they being so close to them and watching World Cup athletes, they might not necessarily get to travel to World Cups throughout the year and all the different places, so to see that at home or in the UK or wherever they come from, it was clearly very special.
I think the open warm-up wall is probably, for a lot of people, going to be their most memorable part of attending that comp. Like, I think there's something really special about seeing like your heroes or at least people that you just think of as like being really strong getting to see what they look like up close. Because if you're at a World Cup, you get to see them for a few moments. They're in their ultimate like performance mode. They're locked down. But okay, yeah, I get to see what it looks like when Mejdi is doing what I do at the gym, and like, wow, I've climbed on that hold before, and like he made that look so easy, and like I think that would just be like incredibly special, especially for young climbers. So I think that's an idea to keep. And aside from the fact that a World Cup warm-up is like a very different ordeal in terms of the huge number of athletes for most of the rounds, I think that's honestly something worth exploring. I don't think the athletes necessarily deserve to have their entire warm-up area closed off. Like, definitely have a private section, but I think the IFSC could gain a lot from that, even if it is like, you know, a VIP experience that the organizers are allowed to sell for a higher price ticket or something. I think that's like such a huge asset. So I'm really glad they pulled it off for PCL.
I like the staging, the lights, the graphics and stuff, the jumbotrons or whatever they're called. Yeah, I felt like maybe to avoid the speed route setting, they could get 2 giant Lazy Susan type things and set them behind the wall and then do this big reveal, like some kind of 80s game show or something with smoke and pyrotechnics. I don't know, I think they could do it. It would solve the problem of the resetting. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's possible. It seems like something Ned Feely could design. Peacemaker rotating wall. But yeah,
you have to make sure it's vibration isolated so that the climbers can't feel the route setting like jitters as they're climbing. But yeah.
But yeah, just overall the sort of production, it came across really well on the live stream at least.
Yeah, I think the day of execution was like pretty much like close to flawless from our perspective. We already talked about like it was too long, there were too many gaps, too much like areas where there wasn't much to talk about, but I didn't get the sense that the people on the ground were particularly lost or befuddled by the task in front of them. It looked like it flowed correctly. There wasn't a ton of confusion aside from, you know, towards the end of the comp, the climbers weren't necessarily sure what their run of show was supposed to be. I thought it was like very well executed on the floor. So congrats to that team. Correct about like the production, like the visuals of it. It looked professional. It looked kind of equivalent to what, you know, an esports event would look like, you know, from what I'm used to watching. So it looked like it had the fit and finish of something that people would invest in, that people would want to watch. It didn't look haphazard. So I think that was all a win in terms of execution and production. I also do just like that it's a different comp. Like when the climbing was happening, I was enjoying watching the climbing. My complaint is the climbing didn't last very long. So for those 30 seconds, I was having a great time. And then it was a bit of a wait. But yeah, I thought the route setting, like in general, the boulders were fun to watch. I do like watching people head-to-head boulders. It's not my dream format for, you know, for like a prestige comp necessarily, but it's fun to watch while it's happening. So I think there are like actually quite a lot of wins for this format and for the competition. They just got to tighten it up.
Yeah, my favorite thing about this format is it really creates a linear story. And the format itself creates the story. It's not just a production thing. You have the qualifiers, you have the semis, you have the finals, and you know whoever gets to the top of that final boulder first wins, or gets as high first wins. It's really, really obvious. And you have the stories, you had the upsets of Colin and Max in the semi-finals, which was really cool, and you could really see it was all really easy to follow, and it felt like it was a format which really prioritizes the athletes, the moments, and the story over the climbing, and the climbing is just a vehicle for those athletes, which is really different from what we're used to, in which World Cups, the climbing is prioritized, like the boulders themselves, and like who is the best climber. Like I don't think any climbing format will ever determine the best climber as much as some climbers want it to. It's just impossible. Like climbing is such a complex sport. Like to say like this person is the best climber, that isn't how it works. You're looking at, if you want to like think about who's the best, you need decades and hundreds of thousands of climbs in order to make anything of sense, any sort of reasonable definition of who is the best.
Well, I'll take
Right?
I'll take
like,
4
trying to do
boulders
that-
over one. I'll take that by itself. Like, yes.
Try and do that on one day. It's like, it's never going to happen. And it's like, fine, this is fun. It was really fun. It was really entertaining. It was speed bouldering, but it was also really fun. And I'm okay with that. It's a different format, and it will. I do wonder whether some of the athletes which will be the best in this format will not necessarily be those who are best at the World Cup format. I think the men's was really obvious because that the people who really love this format, which like Colin and Max, because they absolutely adore this format. They were completely and utterly psyched about this format and about the execution and about the pressure and about the intensity which this format creates.
Yeah, I think that like we discovered like pretty quickly. I've always tried to get Tomoa to be nicknamed the Silver Surfer because he's won so many silver medals, and rather than skate style like surf, it's all the same. But he's not somebody that's necessarily been good at flashing boulders. He's always been the guy that can make the move work and do the biggest dynos and all that stuff. But he was never the guy to flash those moves, and you saw him get punished for that stuff in this comp. It took him multiple times to size up a particular move the right way, or he just didn't execute correctly on the first try, and it exposed a weakness that punishes him in World Cups too, but really shows up in this kind of format. So I think that's totally true, and I think the storytelling could probably follow up on that more as well. But yeah, it's in general like a ton of these ideas are winners.
I think something we've not talked about yet, which is maybe the elephant in the room, is the prize money, because that's very unique in climbing athletes having the chance to win £10,000 in one competition, or 5,000 or whatever for the top 3. And I think however many it was, but I think they also maybe got an appearance fee or like all expenses covered, and I think that far exceeds what the what world climbing offers athletes. So in terms of supporting athletes in their careers, helping them to become professional climbers or sustain a professional climbing career, it was definitely a big win.
I just want to ask really quick, Roy, do you know if all of the athletes had their travel and accommodations paid for, and do you know if any of them got an appearance fee, like being paid just to be there?
So I do not know. What I do know is that they were all put up and in the Intercontinental 5-star hotel next to the venue, and I think that was paid for by PCL. Nothing else I know. The prize money was only for the top 3, and then that prize money was really high, 10, 5, 2.5K, men and women. So it's like 35K total, but split only between 6 people, which really, and they're looking to increase that amount of money. And I think increased it because that increases the jeopardy, right? Like if this goes up to say 50K to win, and then it's only like 10K for second, like that's a big jeopardy. That's a lot. That's even more pressure, right? And so it'd be interesting to see how that prize money changes. It also is one of these things which I worry they're going to spend too much money on the niceties, and that money has to come from somewhere. It's great to look after the athletes. It's great to give them massive prize money, but that money has to come from somewhere. Like the recent Pro Track League, which Michael Johnson sort of came up with, like that was offering 100K for the winners. And that now, I think 2 or 3 years later, is in liquidation. They're looking to refinance, and that was not sustainable, clearly, for what they're doing. And in a very unsexy way, like the success of PCL comes down to Dan and Charlie's ability to get the investment and keep the investment and to make it financially viable, like all businesses. And it doesn't really matter. Does the format succeed? They can change the format to make it succeed. All those things are kind of incidental compared to, do the investors and do the partners really buy into it? And can they make it sustainable and not just blow up in 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I completely agree. I also think that like if you run this exact same competition and you remove half of the field and replace it with some regional people that maybe you guys have heard of for a London comp, but I have never paid attention to, your viewership is going to be cut by more than half, I would bet. So if you can spend the, I don't even know how much it would be, but can you splurge on just a Ryanair flight as well to get the athlete there? Can you pay 500 euros as an appearance fee so that when you get home from this comp, you actually made money? That is probably enough for a lot of the top 10 climbers in the world to show up to your event, even if they are the ones at the comp that say, yeah, I didn't actually enjoy it that much. Oh, I wish I got to climb more, blah, blah, blah. Well, we're paying you and you're coming out positive on this, and it's a great sponsor opportunity. I think that would really change, how many great athletes they can get coming out to these events, because they are going to start running into conflicts where the novelty goes away. And now you're saying, okay, well, if we're scheduling this event in the middle of your rest time or in the middle of your prime training time, or worse, in the middle of the comp season, athletes are going to start making decisions. And if it's not novel anymore and they know Janja's showing up and their chance of winning money isn't actually that high, the least you can do is make it so that it's, not an event that puts them into the red. So they'll obviously do the math on that. I trust that they'll make good decisions, but worth it if they can afford those little things. Because again, the world climbing circuit sets the bar pretty low in terms of financial return. So if you can clear that, I think it would have a pretty big impact on the athletes. What did you guys think about what the athletes chose to wear to this comp? Because something I was a little surprised about was that we didn't see all of the athletes wearing very prominent sponsor t-shirts, for instance. I guess I kind of expected, here we finally have a comp where you're not constrained by your country's uniforms, although maybe some of the countries do have rules where if you're competing, you must wear, the federation uniform possibly. But here's your opportunity, if you're like a La Sportiva sponsored athlete and that's your biggest sponsor, to wear a huge frickin' LASPO logo on your chest, but some of them weren't wearing anything that was particularly prominent. Did you guys have any expectations about that going into the comp, or did it catch your eye at all?
Yeah, I noticed it felt a bit more like a fashion show at times, because Janja was all decked out in like full Adidas, and I think Annie and Oriane were like...
Well, the Adidas athletes were a couple of the few that actually they made use of that opportunity, right? It's the stripes are pretty undeniable.
And Annie and Oriane had their Hitori t-shirt, so it felt like, quite trendy. I didn't see any patches or badges, like beyond short bags. Lots of Red Bull everywhere, understandably. But other than that, I didn't really notice anything. It's quite nice to see them express themselves a bit more outside of team uniforms, I guess.
Yeah, I do wonder whether it will become a bit like cycling, where you have people paying for various parts of the uniform. It'll be interesting to see as this thing develops, because that is an opportunity, and that's one of the things Dan and Charlie have talked about, is they want to make it so that sponsors feel they get more for their buck if they sponsor an athlete who's in the PCL, and they can put a massive logo on their clothing. Hopefully, as things go on, sponsors will see that, and I guess this has to prove that there's enough sponsorship that sponsors going, hey, if you do this and you wear this with this humongous logo, and we've made this kit specifically for you to wear this to advertise us, then I think that will come.
At one point I said, have the women gone into hair and makeup? Because it did look very glam. I don't know, it was just the lights or something. I don't think they had hair and makeup, but it just I think it was just the lighting and how they were dressed and stuff. But yeah, it felt quite rock and roll at some point.
I did ask some of the judges about how easy this was to score and judge it, and apparently they felt it was a lot easier to judge than in World Cups. Because in World Cups you have zone and you have top, and you have to be really careful over what people do. Whilst it's both because of the route setting, but also because I think of the format, there's more margin of error for picking holds, right? And when they get that and that aspect. And then also climb along, which is helping, this is the data sponsor and the people who they're working with. So they have cameras set up on each of the boulders to capture the movements of the climbers. And so they get separate, so they also get separate data of the athletes moving on the boulder, so just tracking data, but also looking at the limbs and when they hit certain holds. So you kind of know they can have that information as well. I don't know if that's being used live. I think just the judging is being used live, but they have that information for afterwards, which I'm looking forward to play around with.
That's good to hear, because my bias would say that no, this is harder to judge. Like, I don't know how they word what constitutes having a particular score, like whether you're on hold 5 or hold 6. I don't know if they use control, stability, use, all that stuff. I don't know. But in this competition, it's as if every hold is a zone, right? So you have to judge on every single hold. And the only reason they get saved, and they may think it's easier, is because somebody else topped. And that is obvious. You no longer have to care what the other person achieved. But if you have more climbs where everybody is only making incremental progress, I think the room for really difficult judging is even higher than it would be in a world climbing event. So we'll see what the next one brings. It might be the opposite. We'll see.
Especially start positions. If you
Sure,
dash onto the wall and just jump into the first move. It's
I think it's more the fact that they move between the holds more rather than getting to the zone is often can be quite tricky, and it's like, is that valid? But also, most of the athletes did not travel with coaches. I think Janja was the only one who had her coach at the event. And appeals, there's a very limited window for appeals, which are done by the athletes themselves, sort of in the 5 minutes or so after the climb. And so there aren't the judging and there isn't the appeals and all of that stuff, which you have in World Cups. And it'll be interesting to see what happens as athletes maybe care about it more and coaches start going to these events and they start disputing the rules a bit more. So the guy who wrote the rule book is Sagi, who's the German bouldering coach, who's the sporting director for the PCL. There is a 11-page rule book, which is quite nice, actually. It's easy to read compared to the 50
It's pretty brief. Yeah, that's nice.
It's only one discipline, and it's only so the format in some ways is simpler, and so they don't have to worry about a lot of the things you have in speed and lead around safety and some of the weird rules which have come up over the years because of when holds spin or problems happen on lead routes. Did they use the athletes' mics that often?
No. They used it while the desk was trying to talk. Honestly, the amount of time the mics turned on while the athletes were backstage and you were trying to listen to Shauna and Bryn and you would just hear random conversation, you heard way more of that than anything out on the wall. I think the only time I noticed was when the Romanian climber had a quick back and forth with one of the judges asking him just a question. But no, we didn't get to hear the climbers on the wall. We didn't get to hear their thoughts or anything. So again, I think the climbers, most climbers, really don't talk to themselves when they're on the wall. And we saw they weren't really talking to each other, so it wasn't really used very much in this instance. So a bit of a thumbs down in terms of effectiveness, but whether the athlete's behavior changes or they adapt the use of that to include what the athletes are saying as they're about to come out on the wall. We had those moments where the climbers were in a mandatory rest period. They couldn't come out onto the wall just yet. Take the camera to the back, let me listen to what they're talking about in those last 30 seconds before they come out on the wall. That's interesting, but otherwise they weren't getting used very much.
Yeah, I do wonder whether they were just worried about various athletes dropping F-bombs.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. If I say anything on the wall, it's not stuff that can go out on TV. Yeah, so probably worth avoiding if you're uncomfortable with that.
There was a bit of swearing on the live stream in the live interviews. They're sorry for that.
I was really surprised that they apologized for that. I don't know. I don't really know what to expect from Red Bull TV. I don't watch a ton of their content, but I thought they could let that one pass.
What did you think of Michaela's interviews?
I think the consensus with everybody we were watching with was she was actually pretty valuable. You know, I have my own like nitpicks and stuff, but she was asking good questions, and she was getting, in a lot of the instances, the climbers to talk about the climbing, which I think is the most important thing and probably the best angle to take with athletes. They're not good at talking about their feelings. So instead, ask them about why they did this move, or you know, how they approached a particular scenario. And I think she actually was doing a good job of that. So yeah, thumbs up to that. Not so much thumbs up to having who felt like a non-climber as the play-by-play. I'm assuming Shauna was intended to be a color commentator and Bryn was a play-by-play. I would just find a climber who or a climbing person that is, you know, half as much of a play-by-play as Bryn, and let them grow into it. Because it just, like, a lot of the most memorable, like, flubs was just moments of ignorance. And that's just, you feel like it's kind of sticks out a bit and isn't that fun. Especially when that's the only thing you have to pay attention to for, you know, 5-10 minutes, it felt like in some instances. Like, let me hear some actual climbers talk about it instead of making up stuff that's really not relevant to what climbers experience.
Yeah, I thought it was good having a separate roving reporter to, like, compared to the world climbing things where you have the co-commenters like,
gotta go
and interview them now and catch it. Yeah, but just a bit more relaxed, and it meant Shauna and Bryn could just focus on what they were doing, and Michaela could focus on thinking of questions and watching the event close up. So
I thought it would be quite fun to talk about, like, what should the world climbing steal from Pro Climbing League.
Well, first thing is what Natalie just mentioned. Even though that's you know, the IFSC team, like, I think they've been using, is his name Richard? I always forget. But there's
Richard and there's Marco.
Right. So they've occasionally been using other people to do the interviews. It's a little bit cleaner. So that's cool. But if you can get somebody that is a well-known climber and that, you know, maybe has the time that day to pay really close attention to the climbing and has a climber's experience like a Michaela, do that instead. Because I know the IFSC people are busy during the event day, so it's pretty hard to gear up for like a high quality interview when you're switching into that role last minute. So there's one suggestion off the top. I think giving some people access to the warm-up, I think that was one of the high points from the competition. And even just if that means putting a camera back there for a little bit so that the viewers can experience a bit more of that, I think that was really fun for us too to see that. So use those assets a bit more. You know, if that means that when climbers are warming up on the warm-up wall, they are open basically to being viewed, and then there's a separate, like, no camera zone. You know, sort something out, that's fine. They're in ISO for a long time in some of those rounds, so they do deserve areas where they can, you know, have privacy and catch a cat nap without the cameras catching them drooling on the floors. But I think that was like a valuable addition. In terms of, like, climbing, and the format itself, I think they're so antithetical to each other that I don't know how much I would actually suggest as a carryover. I think having them coexist as contrasts is kind of what the goal is. So I'm not sure there's too much about the climbing itself that I would suggest. Definitely wouldn't ask the IFSC to use system boards, articulated system boards. Not quite my jam, but that's okay.
yeah, I wrote down prize money first of all, which is easier said than done, but I'm sure that's what the athletes would like most. Yeah, I put backstage, a bit more of that. Behind the scenes would be good. Reporting, like roving reporting. I think having a separate or a distinct commentary team rather than having the random athletes between each event. I mean, I don't know, maybe some people seem to like that, but I think sometimes it works better than others. But having a dedicated pair that does every event could be quite useful. I think, you know, if they could get the level of graphics and production slickness that the PCL had, that would be great. But it's pretty tough. I mean, I think, what did you guys think of the camera angles, like the camera work and the sort of vision mixing?
The only feedback I can give on that is that the photographers got really, really annoyed at the gimbal guy on the mats because he clearly was not aware. Yeah, he would get into a lot of the shots, which made it really difficult for the photographers.
Too bad. No. I think the best sign of the quality of the camera work is I didn't hear anybody talk about it. At least I'm like, maybe if I go to Reddit, there's going to be somebody that managed to nitpick a moment or something. But no, when you've got two climbers side by side, you don't even need split screen. Just put a wide angle camera. The wall's not even that big, and that's like one of the huge benefits of this format is it doesn't require complexity to show everybody all at once. So I think it was a win. Nobody was complaining. I didn't feel like I missed anything. That said, it was a long event. My attention drifted, so I may have missed some bad moments. But yeah, no complaints there.
Yeah, I really like the camera from the top of the wall. I wish the world climb would let photographers or a videographer go on top of the wall and get those top-down shots. It's really cool in speed when they get those through like trigger cameras or they get to go up. Those photos are awesome. Seeing people hit that buzzer. I would love to see more of that in Boulder and Lead as well, and just having that view is just really awesome. You get to see the emotion on someone's face right at the very top.
You've been to a few World Cups. How many of those walls do you really want to climb up behind and feel safely comfortable that you...
None of them, but I still feel like it would be really cool. It would be if you could, like, there's a way almost certainly to help to enable something to happen. I think it would be super cool if they could get that. I also understand that for a lot of these walls, that's not practical. But I think, and it's much easier because of like the board style of the wall. You have it on the big hydraulics, and you can put a ladder in the back, and you can get up on top. You can put a little gangway. It's a far easier thing to deal with than it is than a proper climbing wall, which has all manners of struts in place around the back.
Someone on the Discord called it the Ring doorbell shot because it was like this fisheye of Orion coming up to the top of the wall. I thought it was quite funny. There was a camera in the women's, the one that Erin and can't remember who it was, maybe Annie were climbing. There was like a halfway camera as they threw into this hold outright. I don't think it was used that much, but like mid-wall cameras, which are quite interesting.
Yeah, I think there were supposed to be some cameras like built into the wall for some of those, which again, like we've had it in speed sometimes for some of the photographers have set up the trigger cameras at the top. It'd just be really cool if those could be video cameras and we could get those shots, which are really hard to do without it being built in, because otherwise you have a person there and the athlete that just doesn't work. And so it would be cool to have some of those camera placements be used.
Surely you could just build it into a volume or something.
And so I think so. There's two things I really would love world climbing to do. One is, and I've said this before, I want the scores on a big screen above the wall. I want it to be super obvious what each person is doing on each boulder and what their score is and how many attempts it's been. And I want it to be brutally obvious what their rank is. And I want to know like where they could get to. Like these are the really simple things, people. And I want it on a big LED thing across the top.
Well, okay, you can give some context for the people that don't go to World Cups. Like there is a huge scoreboard at these World Cups. So do you want to explain like what normally shows up at an event and why you don't like it?
So normally there's a scoreboard. It's off to the side and it will have sometimes it will have the overall scores. In like a semi-final, it will be paging through the full score list, so you don't actually know what the people on the wall, what their scores are at any point in time, which when you're watching live and you have 4 climbers on the wall, it's really hard to know what's going on and keep track of it. And it's also really hard to know like where they are, like what their rank is, because you have this paging scorecard to the left and it's not at all obvious. Even in finals, it's not at all, depending on when you're sitting, you sometimes can't see the left-hand side. And then also what they'll use that same screen, which they have for scores. They will go and put the live cameras on it. So if you're far back in the crowd, you can see what the action is like. So you actually have no scoreboard times in the finals. So you have no clue what's going on score-wise. And I just want above the top of the wall, make it really, really obvious. Make it so I don't have to think. Please. That's what I want. I love the fact that PCL had that. That's one thing I want. The other thing I want is I'd love for them to make the storytelling a bit more linear in boulder comps. And by that, the thing I'd love them to do is for the last boulder, for athletes to come out in reverse ranking order of that round, not of the start order.
You're saying after the first 3 boulders, you then reorder them?
Might impact rest time, but...
It would. You'd have to have a minimum rest time in place, which they don't have in the rules. So this does not require a rule change, ironically. But
doesn't require a rule change for the first one until people realize that they just lost their default rest time of 6 climbers climbing. But yeah, okay.
And this is what happened with Serato, right? But I think it will be, obviously it's also really hard to do because of the format with now having 2 climbers on 2 separate boulders. But I think it would be awesome if let's say the last boulder, you had every athlete come out in reverse, so that the last athlete who comes out is the athlete who still has a chance of winning. Because having the last athlete come out in a boulder comp who has no chance of winning because of previous results really sucks. And one of the things PCL does really well is it's really obvious who won. In lead comps, it's really obvious who wins. In speed comps, it's really obvious who wins. It's only in boulder competitions. It's not at all obvious sometimes who has won. Just like in Innsbruck last year when Serato came out and he fell twice and then Toby magically had won.
I would get behind that suggestion as something to try out. There might be little hang-ups that we haven't thought about, but I would second that. Somebody, if you're running a World Cup format, try that at your next comp. I think that would be really cool.
I just really would find it really interesting if we have the athlete who is in first come out last at the end of a boulder comp. That would be really cool.
Yeah, actually, we're doing a comp in the spring. Maybe I'll talk to and if we do it, I'll let you know how it goes. That would actually be a cool idea. Okay, writing that down.
Yeah, those are the 2 big things for me, which I really want.
And I should say the other thing too, a big difference is logistically the number of athletes at this competition was very small compared to a World Cup. But if continental rankings and continental series develop, you could be looking at a World Cup in the next 5 years where it's not implied that every country gets to send a default amount of climbers, which they're getting closer and closer to that every year as the quotas go down. You might be looking at World Cups where there are 40 people that attend, or maybe you cut qualifiers and you just have the top 20. That really depends on the continents getting consistent, reliable systems down. But maybe in the future we're talking about how can you make a comp last 1 day per gender, right? Who knows? They might actually take more from this than we expect.
Yeah, and then the PCL will probably go the other way. It would be great if they expanded the number of athletes to say 16 people. If you expect the men's field especially, you could add an extra 8 top athletes in the world and the quality would not change in any way whatsoever. And not all of those athletes have to be from Japan either. And same in the women's. You could easily add another 8 athletes and there is bigger disparity in the women's field, but you can still add an extra 8 athletes from the World Cup.
We're not doing it on the same day, are we though? We're not.
No, that's the thing, right? But then you have to work out how would that work? How would they do that? Would they still want? What would the seeding round be? What would the format be? How would you deal with that? That would be really cool. Interesting to see how they'd expand to say 16, which is, I think, a more reasonable number of people to have in a pro league. I think surfing has 24 in both men's and women's. Well, in men's, and then I think they have less in women, 18 or 16, and then they have a cut mid-season down to a smaller number. But having 16 athletes competing in the pro climbing league, top league throughout a whole year, and they go to each comp, and they have to. And then if you're in the bottom 1 or 2, you get relegated, or you can choose to not accept your invitation, which is what is happening in surfing and will probably happen in pro climbing league once we hit Olympics. It'll be interesting to see how this format survives the Olympic cycle of 2027, 2028, in which 2027 World Cups will matter to most athletes more than anything in the world because they want to be going to the Olympic qualifier series in 28 to get to the Olympics.
I do think it's interesting. A lot of athletes have complained about how many events they have on through the year, especially when it comes to Olympic qualifying. So I'm interested to see how they think this will fit alongside those events and whether they drop off, as you say, in numbers.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first sport league that has to deal with that problem. But the year is long, and especially a comp like this, so deeply out of the comp season. I think it's all possible. We'll see how they choose to do it.
And if they're willing to put you up for each event, and they're willing to look after you, and the prize money is there, the incentives are there, and the format in some ways is potentially even a bit more random than standard World Cups, that even if you're at a lower seed, you might, if you can make it into, say, a semi-final or something, and if prize money does expand, like beyond the top, bottom, if you essentially go to the top 4, get prize money, which means if you win your quali route, you get some decent amount of money, and it doesn't cost you anything to go there or something, then it's worth chancing it, even in a season where you might care about World Cups, but this comp may actually help you go to World Cups. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Inside Climbing Podcast. If you want more information about competition climbing, you can follow me on @inside.climbing on Instagram, or you can subscribe to my newsletter at inside-climbing.com.
Speaking of going to events, would you, not if you weren't working it, would you go to the next PCL event if you assume it's the same format, same structure, same duration as this one?
If it was in Europe, I would consider it.
Knowing you are towards the crazy end of comp people.
I think if it was in Europe, I think I would consider it. If it was in the UK, I would definitely go. Like, even if it was in, say, Edinburgh, and I had to get all the way up to Edinburgh to it. But it's complicated a bit in Europe by how much holiday I have to take in order to go to other comps, and also have non-climbing holidays. I don't have many of them, and so I need to make the most of it.
If the format doesn't change significantly, I will not watch the next one live. 4 hours was too much of a commitment on the middle of a Saturday for me. So for me, it ran from 2:30 in the afternoon to about 6 o'clock. That was too much for too little climbing. So if it happens again with the same format, I will skim the highlights and just look at the sends. But I will not commit that much time to a format with so much dead time. That's my takeaway from watching it the first time.
Yeah, I would definitely go if it was in the UK, I think. And I managed to get tickets and they didn't sell out quickly. But I think if I happened to be in a place where it was, or there was, I don't know. I don't know how much tickets were selling for either. But people seemed willing to pay for them, so.
If there was one near here, I would go once, although I would really hope there are chairs, because I can't.
Backache.
I can't stand that. I won't go to a concert that's standing only for 2 hours. I won't even do that. So that would have been too much for me. So I'll go once if it shows up, but I'm not going to watch the live stream again.
So if it was in New York and you had to travel there, would you do it, Tyler?
New York? No, absolutely not. No. And part of that is there is a different climate about Canadians traveling right now that I'll be honest, I'm slightly affected by. But no, that is New York is for me that's only an hour and a half flight maybe, or a 10-hour drive. But that's very expensive to go to a 4-hour boulder competition where not much happens. I would not do it. If it was in Toronto or in even Montreal, I would consider it. But otherwise, no.
Thanks, both.
No worries. That was fun.
Yeah, it was nice chatting about it. Yeah, and it was honestly nice to have something new to talk about.